Welcome back everyone. Time to do another iPad Air 4 comparison between another iPad that Apple is still currently selling, which is the iPad 8th generation, which is that 10.2 inch model. Now, both these iPads are pretty interesting because they're not the most expensive iPads Apple makes, but they're not the cheapest except for the 8th gen. The 8th gen is actually the cheapest iPad, at least in the brand new market, and that's something that's really impressive. And what I can tell you is that there's for sure differences. The iPad, 8th generation isn't as premium of a device as the iPad Air 4, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a waste of money or that it's, not as good of a deal, because the 8th gen iPad does cost substantially less than the iPad Air 4, and that's a humongous thing to keep in mind. And I'll definitely tell you, if value of dollar, if that really mattered, the iPad 8th generation is probably a better value per dollar, than the iPad Air 4. But what I will tell you though is that the iPad Air 4 is probably one of the best iPads right now, in my opinion. It has the newest chipset, has a lot of capability, has a newer design than its previous generation, and it's just a very killer device. So if price isn't too big of a deal, I would highly recommend picking up an iPad Air 4, but I'll find the cheapest models of both of these, link them down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front, the iPad 8th generation has that 10.2 inch Retina IPS panel. It's 1620 by 2160, so a fairly high resolution, and it's actually a pretty good panel. Anytime I've ever used any panel from Apple within the last couple of years, it's been really, really good, and this is no exception. There's no ProMotion, no like 120 Hz refresh rate, but we don't have that on the iPad Air 4 either, so it's really not that big of a difference. And I'll definitely tell you, when it comes down to both of these, the front of the iPad 8th generation doesn't even look that bad. You still have the home button, which is a little dated, but compared to the iPad Air 4, it definitely does have a little bit more bezel, but I don't think it's that crazy of a design change. And I'll definitely tell you, if you have to use an iPad 8th generation, I don't really think you're going to complain too much about the design. Whereas on the iPad Air 4, we do have that better looking 10.9 inch like Retina IPS panel. The resolution is just a little bit higher, but they have the same exact pixels per inch, so it's not like you're going to have a crazy better display. Again, no 120 Hz, no ProMotion on either one of these, so keep that in mind as well. But I'll definitely tell you, the iPad Air 4 does have True Tone. It does have, more of a bezel-less design than the iPad 8th generation. So that is something to keep in mind. When you look at both these on the front, the iPad Air 4 is definitely going to give you the vibe that it's a little bit more of a premium device, a little bit more expensive because it is more premium and because it is more expensive. So it just makes sense. And I really do think the Air 4 looks better than the 8th generation iPad, but I don't think it's like a crazy big difference, and I don't think you should just upgrade just because of the way it looks. Now on the bottom, you do have a Lightning port on the 8th gen iPad, but you have that USB Type-C port on the iPad Air 4. And I think, in my opinion, that's a pretty big difference for sure. You're going to be getting a lot more functionality and a lot more capability from the iPad Air 4 than the iPad 8th generation because of that Lightning versus USB Type-C port on the bottom. Now on the back, you do have aluminum backs on both, which both feel extremely premium, but do keep in mind the iPad Air 4 does have the flat side, so it kind of matches up with the newer type of design that Apple's been doing again, which is the flat sides. But you do have single camera setups on both, which I'll go ahead and hit on. The iPad 8th generation has that 8 megapixel back camera, where the iPad Air 4 has that 12 megapixel setup. Now in terms of single camera, there's no like ultra wide or telephoto lenses on either one of these, but do keep in mind that on the 8th gen iPad you can only do 1080p videos at 30 frames per second, where the iPad Air 4 can do 4K videos up to 60 frames per second, and that is an extremely good resolution of videos to film at. That is extremely current. Basically all iPhones are tapped out at 4K at 60, and that is more than enough capability that I'm sure a lot of people watching this are not even going to be using that on their iPads, but having that type of capability is an extremely awesome thing, and that is something that I have a lot of credit for Apple. I give a lot of credit for Apple for putting this type of camera on the iPad Air 4 because it's a really good camera setup. Where the iPad 8th generation, it gets the job done, but if you're somebody who uses the back camera a lot in an iPad, you are definitely going to be seeing a noticeable difference on the iPad Air 4 and how much better of a camera it is than the iPad 8th generation. However, on the front, they share kind of the same camera. Obviously, the iPad Air 4 does have the better front-facing camera, has a 7 megapixel sensor. The iPad 8th gen only has that 1.2 megapixel sensor, only HD video on the 8th generation, where you can do full HD on the iPad Air 4. So again, if you're doing a lot of front-facing calls on your iPad, it may make more sense to do the iPad Air 4 than the iPad 8th generation, in my opinion. But in terms of that really pretty much covers it up for the most part in terms of the camera. Now, you do have Apple Pencil 1 support on the iPad 8th gen, but you have Apple Pencil 2 support on the iPad Air 4. So that may be a little bit of a different reason for some people to actually pick up an iPad Air 4. But in terms of the outside, that really pretty much covers it up. Now, software-wise, they have pretty much the same exact software going on right now, so not a ginormous difference. But like I stated before, you are going to be getting a longer software support on the iPad Air 4 because of that newer chipset. If the iPad 8th Gen and the Air 4 had the same chipset, they'd be lasting pretty much the same. But for now, as far as we know, it's probably going to last longer on the iPad Air 4 than the 8th Gen. But the other thing to keep in mind is that pretty much, they're going to be getting the same type of features for the most part right now. Like, one of them is not going to be super crazy, but the Air 4 is going to outlast the iPad 8th generation in my opinion. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. Now, performance-wise, as stated before, the iPad Air 4 has that Apple A14 Bionic chip inside of it, hex-core CPU, and it's been estimated that it has 4 gigs of RAM, but I'm pretty sure it has 4 gigs in my opinion. With the iPad 8th generation, has that Apple A12 Bionic chip inside of it, hex-core CPU as usual, and 3 gigabytes of RAM. So you're definitely going to be getting a more speedier, more just powerful phone overall on an iPad Air 4, or a more powerful tablet on the iPad Air 4 than the iPad 8th generation. So starting off, I can definitely tell you in my experience of using the iPad 8th generation, it's been a solid contender of basically every single thing I wanted to do, especially as a student. If you're somebody who plans on using your iPad as a student type of thing, if you're wanting to go and actually, type notes and all this stuff, writing Word documents, submitting papers, you're going to have an extremely good experience on the iPad 8th generation. The iPad Air 4 is also just going to give you that experience and then some. So if you're somebody who wants to use an iPad Air 4 as like in a complete, entertainment and media machine, you want to do everything with it, from point A to point B, you want to, video edit and all that stuff, both these iPads are going to be great, but I think the iPad Air 4 is definitely going to be giving you a much better experience overall. But one thing to keep in mind is that there's not really anything one iPad that, it's not like a dedicated feature that one specific iPad has that the other one doesn't. Everything the Air 4 can do, the 8th generation can do as well. It just so happens that the Air 4 is just the faster one when it comes down to it. So when it comes down to the performance, the iPad 8th generation, in my opinion, is still good enough for a lot of people tasks, but I think the iPad Air 4 may be the better one. If you have the money, getting that specific, device with that specific chipset inside of it is going to last you for so long, but it's also going to be an extremely fast and functional machine as well. So in terms of the specific performance segment, that pretty much covers it up. Now, battery life wise, the iPad 8th generation actually has had a pretty good battery life from everything that I've seen. And apparently, I don't have the full, number, but I think the 8th gen iPad actually may have a bigger battery than the iPad Air 4, which is pretty insane to me. It's estimated that they might get the same battery life, but I think the iPad, 8th generation may have the better battery life here, just because, it's not as powerful, which doesn't really work in its favor, but in the battery life it does. But also from what I've seen and from what I've read, it may have a bigger battery, but I could be totally mistaken from that. But from what I've seen in my experience, the iPad 8th generation actually did have better battery life in my experience than the iPad Air 4. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up an iPad Air 4? Should you pick up an iPad 8th generation? Well, let me tell you some reasons why you may want to pick up an iPad 8th generation. I think one of the biggest assets of this specific device is probably the price tag. I feel like the price tag of this, with its, entry-level price of probably even better than some Macs out there and a lot of other tablets and a lot of other laptops in the marketplace, an iPad can replace that. When you think about that, that price tag is super, super competitive. And I think if you, don't even have a laptop, you don't have a tablet, but you are thinking about something and you don't want to spend a lot of money, the iPad 8th generation is a beautiful place to start. It still has a beautiful design. It still feels extremely premium. It's not slow. It's getting updates all the time, and it still feels and runs like a very good machine. Really, the only downside of this specific thing, in my opinion, is the camera. It's definitely not the most, greatest camera out there. The design is a little dated, but it's not really that bad if I'm being completely honest. There's only Apple Pencil 1 support. Apple Pencil 2 is, in my opinion, much better. And other than that, though, there's really, that's really it. That's not that many problems. With the iPad Air 4, if you have the money, if you have a little bit of extra money in your bank account, you can spend it. This iPad is definitely the better way to go. Like I said, I think it's one of the best iPads out there right now. It has a lot of capability, Apple Pencil 2 support, a better camera setup for sure. And because of that design, because it definitely has a newer design to it, that definitely adds a lot more character to the whole entire device structure as well, and that really adds a lot more capability, like I stated before. And for it not being $1,000 iPad but only being a little bit more expensive, that really does add just a little bit more push for me to actually go and recommend the iPad Air 4 than the iPad 8th generation. If they were like $300 or $400-$500 apart, I probably wouldn't recommend it as hard. But because they're, I think, less than, $300 apart from one another, that does make it a little bit of a better deal for people just to go upgrade to the iPad Air 4 if they have that capability. So in terms of that and in terms of this whole entire comparison, that pretty much covers it up. Like I said, if you want to pick either of these ones up, links will be down in the description. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.